All right, sweet. Dan, Biro, Rapids End Coffee. Quite well traveled, I would say. From what I understand, I think it was like 15 years you were traveling around North America, quite accomplished in what you're doing with music and whatnot. Probably got to see and experience a fair amount of coffee culture, cafe culture, other things. And then after that stretch, made the decision to start roasting coffee yourself. I think from earlier conversations you mentioned how just you started to learn a little bit about it and understand that there was quite a bit involved in doing it properly. And then there's this whole other aspect that I know we've chatted a little bit about that involves farms and land and different people and cultures and stuff like that. So I would love to just hear a little bit of that story and how you're sort of arrived at where you are as someone who's like, from my perspective, kind of have founded Rapid Send, but then also is like cultivating culture, in a local community that's connected to all these like some really small farms and farmers and distribution systems and whatever. So, yeah,
Caleb, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm honored to get to do something that I love. And like you mentioned before, I did get to do music and travel. And during that journey, you drink coffee, right? Most people around the world enjoy coffee. It's such a huge industry. I think one of the stats out there is like it's the second largest commodity traded in the world, just behind oil. Don't know if that's like volume or something, but it's the more I kind of like dive into logistics, it's like, oh, like this is people need their coffee and they're pretty passionate about it.
very cool. So I know that having been in your shop and heard you talking about it or seeing like these sacks of coffee beans that are coming from different parts of the world. What has it been like to know that your decision, even as a small roastery to your decision to buy from different regions, impacts them? Like, do you feel like you've seen some of that, or?
I think it's an interesting like supply and demand thing. And right now, farmers are they know there's a lot of demand, so that's good because it drives prices up, right? And they deserve to be paid fairly. We want everyone to make a living through this whole exercise. And I don't know, like sometimes I can work with individual farms, and that's really sweet. Like for example, there's a family with the last name Daza that we work with in Colombia, and it's multi generational. Right now, the girls are kind of taking over for their dad, and they have organic certification, bird friendly. They have like all the things, and like they produce a really good product, and that's like really cool to be a part of that and that kind of direct channel. And then there's also like places like Haiti or Ethiopia where people might only have like a couple trees and they pick them and they throw them in a sack and they take them to the local co-op. And I don't really get to know those people. I just know that by us purchasing from that co-op, then a little bit of those dollars end up in their pockets. So there's both sides of that. You can sometimes work with large family farms as well, like we do in Brazil. Gabriel, he's here in the Greater Toronto area, but his family's there, and I mean he'll come into my shop and teach me about coffee and like how it grows and why it's a pea berry. It's the last flower of the season, and the sun is putting all of its energy into a single seed instead of two. So it's really interesting actually working with all the different tiers of the coffee industry and the growers. Like, do I wish that I could travel more often and see them all face to face? Of course. As you know, raising a family and a local small business, it's not happening right now, but it's definitely not out for the future.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm curious to know. Like, I love seeing what you've done, thinking brand wise, with work and a lot of stuff we do. I remember us having a conversation not too long ago. We were talking a little bit about like AI visibility and building brand. And I was just kind of curious how you were approaching some of it. And you made a comment that, like, I've met some pretty self aware, excuse me, some pretty self aware founders, I think, or those kind of like leading companies or whatnot. But the way you put it, you explained to me how you have this sweet spot in the amount of where you are growth wise. And it was really interesting to me because, I think there's one perspective with growth that is just like pedal to the floor as much as possible, whether it's money or whether it's numbers, like it's revenue or it's size or volume or whatever. And I think maybe culture as a shorthand views that as like, this is good, right? Good direction, more, more, more. And yet it seems like, I mean, there's a lot of examples in even health, if you have certain things that are natural processes, but if they get out of check, if you have too much growth, it can actually be awful. So, but there's a sweet spot in certain areas. And I feel like that self awareness to know at what stage success looks like, different phases of life. But you had mentioned how you really had found that sweet spot. And I'm kind of curious to know, was that something that you kind of stumbled upon, or were you sort of aiming for it before you got to that point?
Yeah, truthfully, there's 2 points I want to make. One, I don't know why this has always been a background like question, and ever since I was like a teenager, but is how much is enough? And I kind of measure everything against that for some reason. And the other side of that is, so before this job, I was in the music industry. We were an artist that toured and all that. And we got to go out with some pretty awesome artists, Mercy Me, Toby Mac for King and Country, Skillet. Um, they were all like the A-level artists, right? Like you say, the pedal to the metal. We're putting all our money, we're cycling it back into kind of our show. And we were always kind of, artist was Hawk Nelson, and we were always kind of like that B-level artist that was like the support on the tour. So like all business, there's some risk involved. Um, but I just felt like sometimes wisdom is like, okay, maybe not everybody has to be the A-level artist. Not everybody has to be Starbucks or Tim Hortons, etc. when it comes to coffee. I felt like it was a really sweet spot supporting artists and like being a part of it. And sure, like the payoff in like terms of, I guess, like money and stuff maybe wasn't as sweet, but how much is enough, right? Do I have a roof over my head? Do I have food on the table? I'm able to provide for my family. These are the things that I ask. And I know that makes me a little bit simple, or like maybe not like, that entrepreneurial, like you say, like culture, like is like more, more. But in my experience, more isn't better. So maybe that's the backdrop of kind of getting into Rapids and coffee here.
Mhm. Yeah, two things that come to mind with me with that. I'm thinking from, growing up in I think sometimes when I try to get the compass for different things, because culturally you get different waves. I mean, even in different cultures in this era we're in may value different things more than others. And then you get different timelines of what's considered valuable. I remember it wasn't too long ago, there's an Asian country that like a couple decades ago, it was like evil to be rich, like completely evil. And it was all against, those that had amassed wealth. Then there's a shift, and it wasn't that many years ago that it shifted where it's like, no, it's glorious to be rich. And I'm speaking from someone in that culture that had shared some of that with me, but how the shift happened. And I know that there's quite a bit involved in that. But sometimes I feel like I'm looking for more of a true north, like who's got a compass that kind of works. And one of the things I think is interesting is, going back to Jesus and thinking about it, is John the Baptist, right? So here's this crazy guy who's like, I don't think we understand how crazy he was. Like he's wearing camel's hair back then, and he's eating bugs and
And
honey. Like
honey,
that was
and honey.
that was crazy back then. Like it's not just a cultural thing. It was like crazy. But here's the thing. He had this idea of repentance, like changing your perspective, shifting. But what was it he said? So he had all these people coming to him, which were like the religious people were coming, Roman soldiers were coming, because like that part of the land was under Roman occupied territory. But he said after they had been baptized, they said, "What do we do?" And he told them, he gives them very practical instructions. He says, "Hey, if some of you have," first he says, "Don't extort people to like the tax collectors. Don't be like rigging the books, taking more." To Roman soldiers, he's like, "Guys, be grateful with what you have. with your pay, right? He's talking to Roman soldiers, two people groups right there that Israel, the Jewish people at the time, really were upset at. And then he said to others, if you have two cloaks, tunics, give one away. So this idea of more, to me, sometimes I look at that and I wonder, what if the compass has been broken a little bit in some respects, in terms of on the larger level. I'm thinking as an entrepreneur or a business owner, if the compass can be jammed a little bit and stop and go, hold on a second. Yes, the tree wants to grow as big as possible. Yes, the plant wants to grow bear as much fruit as possible. But what is the purpose of the fruit? What is the purpose of that growth? Just one other thing with that is, I heard somebody say recently, and this might be a bit controversial, but they explained this is a very aspirational entrepreneur, and he said that when chatting with someone about money, they had asked him, they said, hey, how much money is enough for you? And he said, as much as I can make. And I'm not saying that's the goal for everybody. In fact, I think part of what we're talking about is how to figure out the balance of the ecosystem. But he mentioned it. The other person said, no, it shouldn't be like that. It should be just enough for yourself. And then beyond that. And he challenged that. And he said, well, actually, if your stopping point is just enough for yourself, you're only thinking of yourself in terms of what money is possible for, what it's capable of, right? That really stood out to me, and I know that could even be, excused as like, oh, I'm just doing it to like be helpful. But if it becomes uncoupled from helping those that really need help, then that would, of course, need a course correction. But in both instances, it's made me kind of look and wonder if the goals for growth either lose sight of what's happening around you, like your family, your children, your health, your well-being, priorities around you. If it's just for the sake of growth in and of itself, then that growth may be actually very harmful. But outside of that, if those things are kept in good standing, and you found that balance, then if there's a sweet spot to be able to, achieve more, then how great it would be to be able to port some of that flow into other resources or ways that end up helping, whether it's through a commercial system, like supporting some farms in other parts of the world or communities or that level of enterprise, or whether it is in a kind of nonprofit capacity.
No, for sure. I mean, that challenges me right there. I think like everyone has a barometer too of like, oh, I'm like putting in 80 hours, like my body's failing, like obviously this isn't healthy. Hopefully, sometimes not wanting to build a mass empire is not me just like, trying to be selfish or self-preservation. Um, I know so many business people that like are very successful and they're very generous and they make a huge difference locally and abroad. So like, yes, that actually would be really cool. I don't know if I've allowed myself to actually dream that big yet. I'm 7 years in here, and every year it grows, but it hasn't like grown. For some reason, I just don't have that desire to like try and like compete with like the large conglomerates, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I feel like one of the excuse me, the things that seems timely, um, with a lot of the shifts. So you've got technologically, so much is changing when it comes to the digital side, right? With AI, then you've got and quantum computing coming in. Then you've got this hardware component, robots, machines, automations that's like also entered the chat, so to speak. These two massive levers. Then you've got geopolitical shifting. You've got a lot of cultural shifting, even clashes and whatnot. So you have so many things shifting. And I feel like in the midst of that, where you see entire economies being retooled and you see the culture kind of downstream from a lot of that flow, you see a lot of people who are displaced in terms of maybe their work and whatnot. All of that happening to me sets a stage for like, where are the, where is the essence? Where is the structural fabric of society? And I feel like part of that to me is like, I think of just in our own experience, how integral with Sarah, myself, how integral our relationship is in conjunction to the kind of the things that we do, right? The pulse. And so a lot of that for us is work. We work together, the pulse, and then the family with that. But it's made me wonder how many more new businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses that they'll never IPO or become a big franchise. How many new cottage industries or small businesses really are about to be born, call it out of necessity or out of, the silver lining of a lot of this shifting is a lot of people are going to find a new aspect of independence, by learning to, find some niche and fill it, so whether it's farming or whatnot. So I feel like some of what you have sort of arrived at in finding a niche that works with what you're interested in, how it supports others, and then the level of growth that you have like gotten to and focused on quality and serving customers really well. I feel like that model for a lot of others in other industries may be really timely.
I I think that's really interesting because I don't know exactly because like the stats change now drastically from when 10 years ago. But like every year there's businesses that start, especially in the food industry and stuff, and then like 90% fail in the first like year or 5 years. I don't know what it is, but I've seen a lot kind of come and go even in my small time. And people sometimes will be like, "Well, how do you make it work?" or "What do you do different?" And I don't think I have any kind of special sauce or recipe, but I do say that, and this is something that exists like outside of like technology, and I don't even know if or how you can teach this, but like just the art of caring, just like caring about your customer and caring about your product. I don't know if it's just something that's like in some people and it's not in others. For comparison, there was another small little coffee roastery not far from here, and I was like, oh, they look pretty cool. They had like a vintage train, and like they're going kind of like with some of the same kind of themes we were. But when I hopped on like all their socials, I was like, there's no face, there's nobody, there's no roaster, there's no nothing. It's just like it's almost like AI created this brand and pretty quickly discovered like, oh, this is just like a white labeled thing through some larger roaster in the city. And sure enough, like it's come and gone. And they could still be here. We could be having this conversation, but I don't know. There's still something to be said for like that human element, and at least with the interactions I have with my customers, they're really loving that whole like personal customer human interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do they say? I think in the tech world, the like Y Combinator startup space, I think they say when you're going like in that 0 to 1 sort of phase of like trying to go to market, find product market fit and get your first like 1,000, fans or whatever, you want to go to like almost extremes. You want to do the things that are not scalable while you're small to get to a point where you have such an understanding of your customer. Your product just has been so dialed in terms of quality so that base becomes the base for your brand, so that once you get to a point where you can no longer do those things at scale, you will have like established that reputation. And so in a way you're doing what your larger competitors cannot do. You're more kind of agile in a canoe than you would be in a big shipping
Yeah,
vessel or whatever. Um,
nice.
I think there's a book, is it Unreasonable Hospitality or something? I think it's a New York City restaurant that was just, I don't know what level of star it was or whatever, but they would go to such an extreme. I think they said that 20% of the budget was allocated, for staff to do outrageous things. So, like, for example, I think that they had heard one story was that there was a couple that was in for their anniversary and they had met in New York City, and on their first date they had like New York City hot dogs or something like that, like on the street. And they had just heard that. And so what they had done is when this reservation came through, the restaurant went in and like retooled. I think they even internally set up this area that kind of did their deconstructed version of that hot dog. Or they like, I don't know if it was deconstructed, but they went to just such an
I
insane
mean,
length.
that's so cool. I mean, that's incredible. Who wouldn't remember that and be a repeat? Who wouldn't leave a 5-star review? Um, so I'm not leaving, but there is a customer. He just gave me warning that he's popping by.
Well,
This guy,
let's.
he's like from London or something. He's like on his way to the cottage. He
This is
he won't be
perfect.
long. He won't be long.
Okay. Well, um,
Can we hit pause or?
let's pick this up another time and do a
Ah,
part B. Yeah.
do you know Zach Galifianakis?
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember he had that podcast called Between Two Ferns?
Ah,
This is Between Two
beautiful.
Coffees.
Between two coffee plants. Well, I love it. Dan, I think it's a perfect fitting point that a customer is coming in at this point, and by all means, just to serve them. I so appreciate you, your family, the coffee, and I think that if anyone is even remotely in the Kawarthas area in Peterborough, Ontario, to be able to check it out in person when you're open, would be such a treasure to do so. So, Rapid Zen Coffee, Dan, you're awesome.
We have more to talk about for sure. Thanks,
Indeed.
Caleb. I
All right.
appreciate
See ya.
you.
Bye.